Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming. Winter is coming, as a great man once said, so that's why my videos are going to get increasingly dark over the next few months, but don't worry, as soon as the sun comes up again I will be sure to let you know. This video is about lethality, continuity, and character death in role-playing games, as suggested by Monsieur BoltOrange, following on from my review of Godlike, in which I proudly proclaimed that I'm a big fan of this kind of hit point chart or life measurement in a role-playing game. I like character sheets that have body maps so that you can see where damage is being done to, so you can actually role-play the loss of a limb if you particularly want, so that damage actually means something in a very real sense, rather than in a system like this, where you would have something like 100 hit points and you would just count down from 100 until you reach to 0, at which point your character falls over. Now, while I don't actually have a problem with Pathfinder, Dungeons and Dragons, or World of Darkness systems, or anything else that just uses an arbitrary number to confirm how much health a character has left, I will play a game like that quite happily. I prefer the body map system because I like games with a little hint of realism. That's just my personal preference. Not every game has to be realistic by any means, but in a game where you're likely to come to blows with someone, whether it's by gun, by sword, or by fists, I think that damage, if you are expecting it to be conveyed accurately on your enemy, should also be conveyed accurately on yourself. So it shouldn't just be a case of just knocking 10 bells out of each other until one of you just falls over because he's reached 0. It should be a matter of maybe you shoot that one guy in the arm, you shoot another guy in the leg, because you don't want to kill him, but you can't do non-lethal damage with a gun in something like D&D. No, you need to disable him by shooting him in the kneecaps. Oh, that's not much, not exactly light-hearted or fun, but I'm talking, in a sense, about realism here, and I think in most games I've played, that is what the systems have lacked. I feel that if I were to ever get around to writing an XCOM role-playing game, it would have to have a body map system like that, because I think well, for one thing, that's what it's like in the video game, but for another thing, I just really appreciate that style of damage measurement. Now this leads on to the next point, which is the, well, continuity and, I suppose, lethality. The point is, in a game where you have a body map, it's more likely than not that the game's going to be more lethal. Realistically, being shot in the chest is likely to kill you. And in a game where something like that happens, fair enough, that means that the characters get to experience life just like any other poor bastard. But on the other hand, it does make a problem for continuity. I found this out with, let's say, Pathfinder, and in fact I found this out with Godlike, but let's look at Pathfinder first. In any sense, in any case, when a character dies, if your plot is very dependent on the characters and their stories, if a character dies, like Eferan did in my Pathfinder game, then his personal story is gone. It's gone. I'm sorry, but it's gone. You could have other player characters picking up the pieces from his past and tracking it down if they particularly wanted to, but for all intents and purposes, that character's motivations, his little personal ideals, then they no longer exist. And so if you had planned anything around that, and the rest of the players don't go to the trouble of resurrecting that character, and you don't want to shoehorn that idea in, then I'm sorry, that story is gone. That's not such a big bearing on the major plot, though, as something like, let's say, Godlike, where in my first example, you've got 3 GIs walking across France. They're going to get in a battle with some Germans or some Nazis soon. So you have Jimmy, and Jimmy, he's got his personal story. He wants to go home back to his girlfriend Doris and marry her. That is his aim. That is his personal motivation. And then you have Bernie, who wants to get back home and run the business that his father left to him the way his father would have wanted. He wants to do his daddy proud. And then you have Johnny, who doesn't want to go back to America at all. He wants to marry a cute French chick, so not one with bad breath or hair under her arms, called Mimi LeBonc, and open a cafe with her. So you've got your three characters there with their motivations. And in the case of Ephran, his death could have potentially taken some doing, because he would have had around 100 hit points, being an above 10th level character. In the case of characters from Godlike, it's very unlikely that they will have that level of health, so when the Nazis finally attack and Bernie gets blown to shit, he's not going to get back home to run his pa's business, and the other characters have got their own motivations and they won't feel inclined to do it for him. They're not. This isn't Forrest Gump. But that's one level of difficulty, one level of lethality that possibly could be avoided by a larger and more forgiving hit point system. Bernie wouldn't have to have died if it had more than 4 hit points in his head, but as a German was lucky enough to shoot him in the head and it just blew Bernie's head clean off, then I'm sorry, but Bernie's gone. He can't be brought back. It becomes even more difficult when your characters Jimmy, Bernie and Johnny are behind enemy lines, let's say, because, fair enough, if they're marching towards the Germans, you can presume that other GIs will be somewhere nearby. If they're behind enemy lines, however, and Bernie gets his head blown off, he gets caught out because he says Gorlami instead of Golami or something like that, you're not just going to be able to drop another GI into the situation. You can't just have one parachute into Berlin whilst it's still held by the Nazis. I'm sorry, it can't happen. So this is our problem with lethality and continuity. And, well, character death, because if a character dies in a game, whether it's in Godlike and you're behind enemy lines, whether it's in All Flesh Must Be Eaten and you're in the zombie-infested mansion and it's just your party that's there, whether it's D&D and your party is in a jungle, let's say, that man has not trodden for 1,000 years, what happens when one of your characters dies because you have been unforgiving with the lethality of the game? Because you don't want to hang a player out to dry. You don't want to leave him out in the cold while the rest of the party go around having fun because they didn't have a Raise Dead spell, because they didn't have a Wand of Resurrection or whatever. It is a real problem to me, and has been a problem for me in previous games, because I focus my games so tightly around the characters and their motivations, their personal backstories. I can really struggle to then reintegrate that player with a new character into the plot. We've had about 4 characters, some of us, in the Call of Cthulhu game that we play on and off now. And that is a real bastard, because we've got to somehow find a connection for each of the characters to the previous character who is now dead. Cthulhu is a lethal game. You die or you go mad. It's a famous saying, and therefore there should be some way for a character to easily be slotted into that situation without it seeming arbitrary and, frankly, crap. I'm lucky enough to have only had 3 characters, but still, those 3 characters were a push, getting them to connect to one another or to another member of the party. And when there's only one original party member, do the latest party members really know what's going on? It also sets you on the back foot in a game like Cthulhu, because, for instance, one of your characters may have been studying the mythos, going more and more insane for about 2 years of game time, then unfortunately fall afoul of a snake person, find his bowels spread out on the floor in front of him. It's game over for him. You bring in a new character, he knows nothing about the mythos, and so you're essentially a level 1 character compared to the very few remaining level 15 characters that comprise the rest of your party. I know I'm touching on a lot of issues, and this is more of a ramble than a cohesive rant, but my question to you is, how do you handle lethality, continuity and character death in your games? Are you a forgiving GM, and so you always fudge the dice rolls just before your characters die? My players in the Planescape game over Skype, Ander and Brady, can no doubt concede that I am not a forgiving GM, because there have now been 2 character deaths. I won't confirm who the second one was, because I haven't done the recap video for it yet. But yeah, that's my question. I would like to know how you handle things like that. How do you maintain a level of lethality that keeps the game on its toes, keeps it realistic, fun and exciting, without jeopardising the playability of the game by making characters as thin as paper that as soon as they're stabbed, they just scatter to the 4 winds and, you know, that's it. Show's over for them. I would love to hear your opinions on how you deal with it, and I'm sure that someone like Ander will probably post, excuse me for putting words in your mouth here, Ander, if a character dies then that's a jack to them, that's a jack to the player, well, he can't do anything like that, he's just going to sit on sidelines until another character comes in, naturally. And that's all well and good, that's how I do it, but it also leaves some players feeling slightly resentful, to which you say, those players should grow up and eat a dick, or something like that. Whereas someone who's a bit more lenient about such things, like, oh, I don't know, I'm going to pick a name out of a hat here, and say BoltOrange, as he raised the subject in the first place, may well say, well, he always makes sure there's a passing priest with a raise dead spell, or he always makes sure there's another party of adventurers in the dungeon at the time, so that there's a constant pool of other characters that can be put in. But what about more difficult situations, where your GIs are behind enemy lines, where your aquanauts are at the bottom of the ocean, where your vampires are raiding the tomb of the Methuselah? Do you bring one of them back as the Methuselah? I would love to hear your response, so thank you very much for watching.